Now that we just talked about the beef noodle soup and dumpling, how they're now everywhere, and beef noodle soup is known as a national dish. But Henry, as I understand, prior to the 1950s, before people fled China for Taiwan, people didn't eat beef noodle soup. That was not something you can find, right? But why is that? What happened?
Does this work?
Yeah.
How many people here have had beef noodle soup before? And how many people know that it's specifically a Taiwanese thing? And we can talk about that definition later, or get into that if we go that direction. But so Taiwanese beef noodle soup, it's considered to be the national dish of Taiwan. But as Sean is mentioning, it didn't originate until after 49, and there's a lot of geopolitical stuff going on, which I can do a really quick. Would that benefit everyone if I talked a little bit about the culture, politics, history? So Sean did say people fleeing from China to Taiwan in 1949, but in essence, people maybe have been fleeing for centuries to the island of Taiwan. The island of Taiwan is part of Micronesia and has an indigenous population that now we say is 2% of the population of the island. So 98% of the population is ethnically Chinese, but it had traditionally been directly across the strait in Fujian province, and specifically southern Fujian province. So the dialect that I grew up speaking, my parents are actually half. My mother's side is, we used to say, or we still say it, but we say Taiwanese, but actually it's just a very specific population. I think in Taiwan now, people are very PC and everyone says, everyone here is Taiwanese, whatever ethnic group you are. But the predominant group of 70-something% is directly from across the strait, which is considered southern China. And then 14% of the population is Hakka, traditionally, which is what my father's side is, and which has another whole dietary and culinary history. And anyway, so, and then in 1949, when the KMT, the Kuomintang, that was under Chiang Kai-shek, was fleeing mainland China from the communists. People came from every province of China, mostly military, political leaders. It's a small island, so not everyone could come, but we have representation from all provinces of China in Taiwan. And beef noodle soup, okay, sorry, I'm nervous. Sorry.
You got this, Henry. You got this.
And I talk a lot, so I'm like, where do I go with this? So many factors. I mean, we could break it down to, as many people here know, in Taiwan and in Chinese culture, people are not eating beef or oxen. They were work animals, they were pets. There's a Buddhist history. There's not a lot of meat eating prior to this era. And wheat also is from northern China, so the ethnic Chinese that were already on the island of Taiwan were predominantly eating rice or rice noodles or taro and other starches. And then, but the military that came from, there's some contention about in beef noodle soup if it's from two different areas of mainland China. But the kind of soup that you had here, the hong sao, the braised red Sichuan style, is kind of attributed to some of the military dependents who were living in these villages that were set up by the government. And some of that flavor profile is the Sichuan peppercorn and the spice, which we did not cook with in Taiwan. The ethnic Chinese were not cooking with before. The beef, actually, I always thought of it as a 1949 allied with the U.S. and getting cheap beef imported from the U.S. during that time. But it turns out, in researching just for this event, I didn't realize that there was this Japanese component, because Taiwan was also a part of Japan from 1898 till 1945. And it turns out the Japanese, newly after the Edo period, because they were closed off to the rest of the world, when they opened up in the 20s and 30s, they also were not eating beef and other land animals. But then, because of the connection to Europe and trying to westernize, they started making meat more important in the diet. And actually, they started building meat packing plants and importing cows from Japan to Taiwan in the 30s. So they say that it kind of primed the locals in Taiwan to start eating meat, but it was mostly the elite. But then not until the US government and the importation of kind of cheap or cheaper or accessible beef and wheat products was this an available thing for the Sichuanese community to start playing around with and putting out. So that's kind of the history of this soup and how it kind of developed. And so people will often refer to it as, oh, this is, and I know this is a political thing and very cultural, but when people start talking about, no, this is from Sichuan province or this is from mainland China, I'm like, no, people weren't eating beef there. So it turns out, and this is another interesting, last time I was in Taiwan, I was going to a lot of beef noodle soup shops, and I went to a few halal ones from the immigrants from Western China that were also known to be the first makers at restaurants for the public of beef-related things. So that was kind of interesting. The Muslim population was kind of the first kind of cooking with beef in Taiwan. So that's the story. And I'll take a breather and explain this soup and how this came to be. I've been working on this soup for 10 years casually, living here in the Bay Area, and kind of the ingredients and how it came to be this way. But maybe I'll do that later.
Yeah, we'll give you a little breather here.